Welcome to today's episode, the podcast where we discuss the most recent installments of a different series every show. Brilliant Minds, originally titled Dr. Wolf, released its pilot on NBC September 23rd. It's about 40 minutes. Zachary Quinto plays an attending neurologist with face blindness. He has a knack for solving incurable disorders. So it's been a while since I've seen Zachary Quinto on TV. I remember the first thing was probably 24 many years ago. He played Adam in that, and then he jumped to his big role as Siler. And
Heroes,
then, yeah, in Heroes. And then it was American Horror Story, where he also played a doctor.
He's been in American Horror Stories for a lot of seasons.
Yes,
even in 2022.
I think season 2 may have been his biggest role in that series. Again, he played like one of the crazy doctors, if I remember correctly. And then he was in The Slap.
Right.
And Spock, obviously.
And he said that he was really excited about this role because he's going to be able to play the protagonist when you take into things such as American Horror Story, Nosferatu, The Slap. He says that he's kind of tired of playing the villain. He wants to kind of spread his wings and become the good character. Because this is based off of Oliver Sacks, a very famous neurologist.
Yeah, I know it was based off Oliver Sacks, but it does tend to fall into the most cliche medical tropes. What do Royal Pains, Community, and Chef and Brilliant Minds all have in common? The main character, in order for the audience to feel good about them, gets fired at the very beginning, but then rehired doing something even more special, right?
How long does it take him to get rehired in this show?
I'll get to that. In the second thing that it does is like the Good Dr. Doogie Howser Transplant. You remember Transplant.
Yes.
And ER, they all do the same thing where there's an emergency and there's a lot of people dying or someone needs to be saved. House, I think, did it too. In that first episode, but the main guy, in this case, Dr. Wolf, is the only person who's able to help, right? And so that's where our case of the week comes into play. But I've never seen as bold an opening as what Brilliant Minds does. Because in the first scene, he cures dementia. He takes a patient out of the wing that they're in at the hospital against the wishes of the nursing staff, against the family's wishes. He brings them to their granddaughter's wedding, I believe, and then he sticks them at a piano. And the guy who's actually played by someone we've talked about before because he was in the Elsbeth show, right? Andre DeShields.
Yeah,
he's
right.
The guest star.
He has a huge Broadway connection.
He's barely in this show, but he does sing here because he gets in front of the piano and suddenly he remembers how to do that. Music has that connection with Alzheimer's. And so once he's done with his performance and everybody claps, he's able to remember his granddaughter.
Wait, so he actually does?
Yeah, he gets up and he's like, oh my God. I mean, everybody else is like, oh my God. He's just like, I know who you are.
That's shocking to me because most of the cases that they deal with, at least with the show, Greg Berlanti, the creator of this, said that they are real, like that, and that the actual.
Okay, so there's like a sliding scale for medical shows, and you have the accuracy point of view, and then you have the sappiness. And this is just a very sticky show because it's taking things that we know to be sure. Like even on 60 Minutes, you'll see how music can bring some Alzheimer's patients out of it and they'll be singing along with something. But that doesn't lend itself to then remembering everything, like your family's names, your granddaughter's name, if you've forgotten that. In the second scene, he gets fired. In the third scene, he's rehired at another hospital. In the fourth scene, he's having a vision quest because he jumps into the East River. They keep saying he's from the Bronx, but they keep on showing us the wrong bridge. That just annoys me because it's the 59th Street Bridge that they keep on showing, and that's just not the right one. It's even got my favorite bad lines in this show. For instance, I think when he's getting fired, they say, "You're not his wingman, you're his doctor." Dr. Cohen, you don't understand. No, you don't understand. Those were two of my favorites. Later on, when he's meeting the interns, there's this back and forth between him and the girl who realizes that he has face blindness. She says she's explaining who everybody else is, and she says he thinks he's the quarterback of the interns, and then he's like, "And what do you think? I'm the one who tries the hardest, and that you're going to want around the most. I'm the real quarterback."
So this just confirms what I was scared about with the TV series, because the creator of this worked on Pretty Little Liars, Original Sin, Degrassi, The Next Generation, and Riverdale, and then the person who helped him write this episode worked on The Perfect Couple, Quantum Leap, and Blind Spot. And they said that the touchstones for the series, what they were kind of influenced by, was The Diving Bell and The Butterfly and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. None of that.
So like he has a bunch of backflashes where he remembers his dad as schizophrenic,
right?
And he walks through his memories a little bit. not really in a creative way that we've seen done, but I guess if you want to compare it to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, that's where they're taking that from.
But in none of what I mentioned had they even had any type of like medical training. I know they obviously had consultants that and like nurses on set, but it didn't seem like they were really
The biggest sin of the medical field, I guess, is the way they portray the interns is like high schoolers. They're like teenagers in the way that they talk to one another. And if you've seen Scrubs or Grey's Anatomy, you know that there can be jokesters or flirting or, immature stuff. But these guys, they're like a whole different level. They're calling shotgun. They look, they don't seem to be doing anything. They're obsessed with social media. I blame the pandemic. I think the pandemic really screwed up our education system or something. Also, as far as developing your character, I understand that Oliver Sacks probably did have probably does have face blindness.
He died in 2015, but he did have prosopagnosia.
Yes, so that's where they need to like concentrate on certain. I've seen a horror movie where there was like a lady whose husband like replaces himself or something and tries to pretend to be her husband when he's really not really, and she can't tell because she's got face blindness. I think you can either be born with it, and then also I think you can develop it if you've had surgery or something.
I think there was even a Hannibal episode where one of the victims had something like that.
Oh, I thought you were going to say where like he ate the part of the brain
No.
where they remembered that. And okay, no. So yeah, he is face blind, but then they add all these other quirks to him. Like he doesn't get along with other doctors. We've seen that before in House. We've seen that before in every sort of angry genius show. He's a loner. He's a classical He's a classic music enthusiast. He listens to classical music all the time when he's working out, when he's working on his ferns because he's a botanist at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
He rides his motorcycle, so he loves to work on that. He's also a very bad driver when he's not driving his motorcycle. We see that also because he lives in New York or the Bronx, and he's also gay because Zachary Quinto is gay. And it feels like ever since Heroes, whenever he plays a character, maybe not in the slap. I don't know. I didn't see the slap, but I think they always add that to his character.
Well, I know that Oliver Sacks kind of did address his homosexuality in like a 2015 autobiography the same year that he died. So I think that like when you were looking at Dr. Wolf, you're just supposed to be looking at kind of a replica of who Oliver Sacks was.
That's interesting. So his mom was the chief of, because this was the big twist at the end, was that he ends up being rehired by a hospital where the chief of medicine is his mom. And the mom is the one who kind of called out his dad as being just a lost cause, which clearly affected him as a child. Part of the reason he wanted to become not a neurosurgeon, but just a neurologist in general, was because of his own face blindness, his dad's issues, and also, I guess, proving it to his mom that he could.
You were mentioning how he was like a musician and all this other stuff. Did they ever talk about swimming at all? Because that was something that Oliver Sacks was pretty passionate about as well.
I said he took a vision quest by jumping into the East River.
Yeah.
So like that was, he jumps into there the first time, and that's when we see his dad talking to him about how he's supposed to deal with his symptoms. And so that's why he's connected with his dad, why he feels like he could have helped him had he been given the opportunity, had he been older. The main case here, though, because it is a case by week scenario, is that you have an epileptic mom. She just got out of surgery, so she no longer is having the epilepsy, but she's freaking out because she has Capgras Syndrome, which is a reaction to having had this surgery. Her brain is just not recognizing her kids as being real. She thinks that they've been replaced like changelings.
Right. You lose all emotional connection, and it's like replaced by an identical imposter.
He confirms this diagnosis by taking her to her childhood home, and then she doesn't recognize it. She thinks that that's a fake home as well. I didn't know it could apply to non-organic material, but I guess that's how, but I feel like it took them way too long to come up with the diagnosis, given that she is so textbook. So that was also a little
off of a quick Google search. It just says that usually they're given dementia drugs, antipsychotics, and antidepressants along with some therapy. You're saying that they don't do that in this TV series?
Right. So we're introduced with her screaming. He's in the middle of meeting his interns. He's taking a shower and he's meeting his interns. I don't need to explain that. And so she's going around the hospital being like, they're not my kids. They're about to put her under a little bit. And he goes running up and he's like, don't touch my patient. What's wrong with your kids? And she's like, they're not real or something like that. And so then he says, let's do the smart thing here. Let's discharge her in custody of the kids. She's still going to be in control of the kids. Let's discharge her. We're going to follow her to her house, and we're going to watch her and see how she does with the kids. And when he gets there and he talks to her, he's like, I want you to remember what you love most about your kids. And she's like, I love that one has a dimple and one has buck teeth. And he's like, okay, do that as your, think about that as your homework. And then he gets a call in the middle of the night, and it's Child Protective Services telling him that it's raining and that she's kicked her kids out and they're going to be taking them away. So he drives over there on his motorcycle, and he has a little bit of a fit being like, why you can't take them away from her. And the next day he's even arguing. He's saying, you wouldn't have taken away her kids if she had a broken leg, completely omitting the fact that, like,
she's the one that kicked them out.
Yes, she clearly doesn't want them, but he says because they're both injuries, he's treating the CPS person as if they're doing something wrong, and that was the kicker that I found pretty funny.
Oliver Sacks, he would try to connect with his patients, really patients that weren't ever going to be able to return back to like kind of a normal state in their brain. So he would do kind of unorthodox or things that maybe were against the medical field, but I don't think he ever did things that were crazy as this. Like the books that he wrote and everything were mostly just about his patients. I don't think he went like
this
talking
is about
to CPS
Helen,
people
or whatever her name is, but I'm gonna call her Helen because I think that's what her name was. So he brings Helen back in for testing, and his testing is that she's watching a video of her kids that was taken before the surgery. She still doesn't recognize them. So what he does is he puts a blindfold on her. Real revolutionary stuff here. And it is 2024. There's smartphones and stuff. So it's not like this is way back in the day. He puts a blindfold on her and he turns the computer around, and she just listens. Why would he need to turn the computer around if she was wearing maybe the blindfold comes in later. Okay, so I'm imagining the blindfold. The blindfold actually comes in later. He just turns the screen around and has her listen to it, and she realizes that those are her kids, in fact, and she starts having like crying because she misses them, and then that sends her into a seizure.
She goes into a seizure?
She goes into a seizure. So they admit her again in the hospital, and the person who did the surgery comes in and is like, what's happening to my patient? And he says, I was trying to understand what damage you did to her brain. So there's a little bit of a turf war there.
So the people that he's against, Dr. Oliver Wolf is against, are supposed to be like
just his rival.
But like the antagonist of the series, right?
He's got his best friend, who's the person who hired him. Her name is Carol. I thought she was the chief of medicine for the whole episode.
Carol Pierce,
yeah. Until I realized at the end that it was. I thought she was his Cuddy. If you're comparing it to House.
Her character was based on Carol Burnett, not the famous one, but a friend of Oliver Sacks.
Oh, so it would have been funny if Carol Burnett, the friend of Carol Burnett, but not the famous. So yeah, Doc Wolf, he's trying to help her get her kids back, even though she's kind of in like a very vulnerable state, you could say.
Right.
The kids even know that she doesn't love them, and he's like, only when she sees you. Which was actually probably the cleverest dialogue that they had in the entire show. He then explains that his shirt is the periodic table. Point is, she gets re-discharged somehow, but without the custody of her kids. And Doc Wolf thinks this isn't right. He runs after her in his motorcycle. It's raining again. He makes his way to this cliff that I guess she told him about. She's about to jump off of it with her car.
She's about to commit suicide?
Yeah, and he gets on in there and he's like, no, don't do it. And so the next day, it seems like, I'm not 100% certain, but it feels like the pacing on this is so off, because it feels like the next day he invites her kids again. He invites CPS, and he invites all the other doctors to show that she, in fact, can take care of her and prove that she is a good mom. To him, a good mom just means that she loves her kids. So he puts a blindfold on her, and he's like, look, she remembers her kids. And she does, in fact, hug them. Now, the CPS agent does the right thing and says she can't live a life with a blindfold on. And so that's when Dr. Wolf turns around and says, well, I have a 3-point plan. Number 1, she's going to call her kids with her cell phone every morning to make sure that she acclimates herself to that sound first of who she knows they are. Number 2, we've developed a very special, now this is the first time we've heard about this development, but we've developed a very special lens to these glasses that we're going to put on her, and she will now be able to recognize her kids. It will help recalibrate her brain. They don't go into that any longer than just 2 seconds. And then number 3 is they're going to have to work together on this one. And then you see a flash cut to them in the future and her kids interacting. So we hope that things went well. There was a dad that they could have gone to live with. That probably would have been the
It also doesn't
answer.
seem like they ever really she ever changed her opinion on, like, kicking them out. Like, it doesn't seem like that couldn't happen in the
Oh,
future.
it could definitely happen. There was even a point where the CPS agent earlier on in the episode was like, she's going to need people to come visit her to make sure that she's doing a good job. And the just disgusted look on Dr. Wolf's face when he hears that, he is not having it.
Okay, so Greg Berlanti, he said when giving interviews for this that he's more interested in storytelling first. And
Oh,
I know
really?
that Zachary Quinto, he had been cast for Dr. Oliver Wolf for over a year before they even started filming the series.
So he didn't see the script and sign on. He signed on and then he saw the script.
I know that he's a big fan of Oliver Sacks. He even said that they could run this series for 7 years, and with all the TED Talks, lectures, and interviews they have, that's what they hope to do. But I mean, like, I was hoping that what I was seeing with the credits, they were going to at least have some type of accuracy with hospitals, and it doesn't seem like they did. In fact, the only person who it seems like really does have a stake in kind of hospitals is Greg Berlanti. He was even Times 100 most influential people, director of Love, Simon, Fly Me to the Moon. He created Eli Stone. He is a board member.
So the mental part of it.
Yeah, so it seems like they were really just kind of trying to focus on, because you were saying how they interspersed it with backflashes, the Dr. Wolf's mental state.
I was thinking more about the fact that he's disabled, that he can't recognize people. It didn't really come back into play in this episode, but I'm sure they're going to have that factor in later on. And because he actually had that in real life, it makes sense. Why he had to be fired at the beginning of this episode doesn't make that much sense. It feels like that was kind of thrown in there. Why his mom has to be the chief of medicine feels like kind of pointless drama so far.
I was hoping you could tell me why Los Angeles Times compared the show to the English teacher, saying neither shies away talking about burnout nor the many reasons why people leave these professions, because it doesn't even seem like Dr. Wolf or any of the people are leaving their professions. It seems like he's just kind of coming up with solutions.
I would say probably the main character is begrudgingly a teacher in this. An English teacher, he loves being a teacher.
Right.
But at the same time, he's like bonding with the kids differently than what teachers have done in the past, right? He's a little sarcastic and stuff.
Yes.
I guess he brings a little bit of that to the thing. But like I said, the residents or the interns, they act like teenagers. They really do need someone to keep them in line. I really have no excuse for their behavior. I remember in Scrubs, Zach Braff in like commentary has made such a big deal about how they were so accurate to try to not only bring the emotion, but also show like the amount of effort and work that went into that type of job and like the overuse. And even in House, you would see that. But in this, it seemed like one of them is like is just popping pills. The other one is on the phone the whole time. Like one's a jock. It's so strange. So ultimately the characters aren't my favorite. The diagnosis was late in this episode. The treatment felt bad. The message wasn't great either. The fact that you can just get your kids no matter what. So 2 out of 10.
2 out of 10. Wow.
I was not a fan of this episode. It was more funny to laugh at the fact that in the first scene, it seemed like they had just said that this guy cured Alzheimer's.
The show has gotten a 6.3 on IMDb. It has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, but only like 8 reviews. And I know that people are more focused when they're talking about this series on kind of the drama that it sends. And it's supposed to be feel good, like optimistic as well, which It seems like some reviewers have pointed to be good. But USA Today called the series mind-numbing while awarding it 1.5 out of 4. They criticized Quinto's performance, saying he grates as Oliver's, calling the secondary characters more interesting. So aside from that last part, it seems like that's probably the review that you most agree with. But
it wasn't grating as much as I was. Why did they speed through this story? Why couldn't they have thrown days at the bottom of the screen and been like, this is week 1, this is week 2? It felt like she was his only case. So they kind of had to make it happen in a vacuum. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense that with someone who is trying to recover from such an extensive brain surgery would be released from the hospital so quickly and in charge of her kids and then get their kids back. Like CPS doesn't just get controlled by doctors. A doctor cannot just call someone up and say, we're going, like, they work on their own time
Right,
schedule.
and being such a neurologist, like, and it doesn't just take like a week's time for him to figure out the solution. Oliver Sacks, it would obviously take months upon months before he could even come to any type of conclusion as to what to give the patient, because he was trying to connect with them on a different level.
Well, I mean, in this case, it was just a blindfold, so it didn't take a lot.
But
Unless he wanted to get in on those glasses. Those glasses probably had some. No, in reality, like, that probably was the most significant part of the treatment, and they gloss over it. They say it for 2 seconds and then they move on. There's not a lot of intrigue here from me. I do find the title kind of interesting because they switched it from being just about him, Dr. Wolf, to Brilliant Minds, which is concentrating more on the patients, but also applies to him himself. So I do like the title. I don't like the show. And that's where my review is.
The last thing I'll say is that it was based off of 2 books that I wrote. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Anthropologist on Mars. You just mentioned how you like the title, and I like the title of those books, but those were the 2 from Oliver Sacks that they based on the most.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.